So thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's talk, From Lagoon to Empire, the Story of Venice. Michael J. Ranieri graduated from St. Francis College with a bachelor's in history and St. John's University in New York with a master's in Chinese studies, where he also taught Chinese history and Mandarin. And he had a valuable experience in academia, followed by 30 years as an international banker. He's lived abroad and worked abroad in Taipei, Bangkok, and Hong Kong for more than 20 years. And after his career as a banker, he shifted his focus from finance more towards research, writing, and lecturing on a variety of history subjects. He's conducted extensive independent historical travel research throughout Italy, particularly in southern Italy, with an emphasis on migration history, local history, and Italian diaspora connections. And then more recently, he has devoted his time to researching his family's roots in Italy, and he's published a book, No and the History of Our Family. Michael has also written several articles for Primo, a magazine for and about Italian Americans. And his current project is American Dollars, Italian Lives, How Immigrants Sustain Families and Help Shape the Nation Across the Atlantic, which is a book-length study examining the role of remittances sent by Italian immigrants in the United States to families and communities in southern Italy from the late 19th century through the mid-20th century. Michael has also formerly served as the president of the board of directors of the Italian Cultural Society of Naples, Florida. And without further ado, enjoy tonight's presentation, and thank you again, Michael, for sharing your research with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Jim. Nice to be here with you, and buonasera a tutti. Buonasera. Good evening, everyone. Now, before I get into this presentation in any detail, and before we kind of talk about the charm of Venice and its history, and I think the charm is pretty well captured in that photo on the left there of the gondola, which has been around for like 900 years, the gondola. Before we talk about the gondola in any great detail, which really represents Venice because of the water, right? And how much Venice over the years, for 2,000 years, has depended on the water for its very existence, right? Not to mention the beauty associated with the water. And also, before we start talking in greater detail about this basilica, which is more than a house of worship, this St. Mark's Basilica, right in the heart of historic Venice. Before we do any of that, and by the way, these two landmarks, if you will, or the gondola, right, which is, that goes up and down the canal in this floating city of Venice that we know, in this lagoon of Venice. And before, and given this church, basilica, like I said, more than a house of worship, just keep in mind that these are the oldest and most enduring symbols of Venice. When you think Venice, really this is what one thinks of. And it's sort of like the Eiffel Tower of France, right? Landmarks as this, or Big Ben in England. So I think that pretty much captures Venice, the story of Venice. But before I even go further into this, into my slide presentation, I have two questions to ask. Right. One is, how many of you have been to Venice? My word. Okay. Okay, that's terrific. And how many of you and others, when you think of Venice, or you primarily think of Venice, what do you think about? Do you think about the romantic ride you took on the gondola? The masks that you see all over town, right? Those painted masks, right? Many of you, I see you shaking your head, yes, right? Or maybe it's that very, very expensive cup of cappuccino, right? At St. Mark's, or a gelato in St. Mark's. This is probably what you think about, right?
Costs want to sit down.
Sorry?
It costs more to sit down.
It costs more to sit down, that's right. It certainly does. But it's usually very pleasant if the crowds don't bother you too much, right? But the reason why I got involved in this, people ask me this all the time, well, what makes you research, spend all this time and money and research about Venice? The one thing, there are two things. I'm only going to tell you one now. Later on, I'm going to tell you the second reason why I'm into all of this. But the first reason is, time and time again, when I went to Venice with my family, little did I hear about the other reason why the other thing we should think about when we think about Venice. It was a major trading empire. And I don't use this word lightly, empire. We talk about Roman Empire, we talk about Greek Empire, we talk about this, that, but there was also a Venetian Empire. It was a major trading nation. It controlled the Mediterranean, controlled the Adriatic Sea. It used to be called the Queen of the Adriatic, Venice. But you don't hear about it. And I never heard about it. I had to do my own work to learn more about it. You know, tour guides would take you in and out of this beautiful basilica, which, by the way, Rick Steves calls peerless. And I agree with that. Peerless. Right? Nothing like it in Europe. And if you look at it closely, right, it's very, very Byzantine. Right? It's very Eastern looking, more than Western looking. That's why they call it the architecture Italo-Byzantine, but I like to say Byzantine-Italian because it's more Eastern than Italian. But in any case, I thought I would start out by saying that let's keep in the back of your mind that indeed this Venice was a major trading, a naval superpower of its day, a naval superpower. And there's something else very astonishing about Venice. It was very, very small. Anybody know how small? 3 square miles, historic Venice, and they ruled the seas like they did. Think about that. 3 square miles. What does that mean in terms of Boston? Beacon Hill, North End, Back Bay, maybe some of the waterfront, and the financial district. That's it. 3 square miles. And I have a great slide, if you know anything about New York, that it's about 2 central parks. 2 central parks. That's it. And they rule the seas. It's incredible, astonishing story. And while we're on the subject of surprises, I have another surprise to tell you. You don't want to go to Venice if you like pizza. You don't want to go. You don't. Pizza. Right? No. You want, save your money, save your time. If you want to have pizza, go to Naples. Right? Good old traditional pizza, it's Naples. Not in Venice, if you ask a Venetian what to eat, they'll tell you seafood of some kind of bacala, if you like bacala, that kind of stuff, right? But not pizza. In fact, there's something that I wrote just recently. It said, traditional pizza is about as Venetian as clam chowder is Roman. Right? So, you know, it is true. You don't go there for pizza. So today I'd like to go beyond the postcards, right? The romantic gondola ride, the masks. Let's go beyond that. And beyond the fact that it is a very beautiful city. But let's remember that it is a success story as well. A city with no farmland, no natural resources. And it built an empire. Okay? So here we go. So like most of you, right, and most of us, this is what we see when we go there, right? We see the square, of course. You can't you avoid the square, right? Cannot avoid it. And the church itself, of course. The gondola ride up and down the canal, right? You're going to see that. That's what you see. The masks are all over town. And in case anybody doesn't know, these masks are worn They're on sale all over the city, painted masks. Why? Because the Venetians, in the run-up to Lent, right, and the Carnivale, right, they like, and something that they've done for many, many years, dressing up, going to masquerade, balls and parties of sorts. And the city of Venice does contribute to this. They like this idea.
Is this sort of like Mardi Gras down in
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. But in Venice, there's nothing erotic about it. There's nothing risque about it. It's very subdued in that sense. But people do dress up. They do dress up, wear masks. And it's become kind of a tradition for tourists to buy a mask of this kind. Just like you see there. Just like you see it. And they're painted very well decorated. It's kind of nice. I've never bought a mask there, but a lot of people enjoy that sort of thing. And you see them all over town. And of course the gondola, taking the gondola ride. And this is something that I often recommend people do, is go to this is the Doge Palace, the Doge's Palace. The Doge is the leader, the deuce in the native dialect, which comes from the word, from duke in English, and it's called Doge, D-O-G-E. I'll get into this in more detail during the presentation. But in any ways, the Doge Palace is here. There are 400 bridges, 400 in Venice, 435 I think to be exact. The only covered bridge is this one, only covered bridge. And this was the bridge that convicts would take to go from the Doge's Palace where they would, where they received their verdict, to the penitentiary here. This used to be a jail. And this bridge of size was coined by Lord Byron in the 19th century. So this is where these convicts would actually look out and get their last look of Venice. So Byron said, they would say, oh, my Venice, and what's going to happen to me now? Anyway, this is called the Bridge of Sighs. And you could do this as a tourist. Go from the Doge's Palace, beautiful, ornate, very decorative palace, to the other side, which is kind of a museum today. But anyway, that's the Bridge of Sighs. This is what most people see, right? What am I going to do today? What am I going to do today to kind of suggest that there's much more than what we just saw, right, on that last slide, right? First, we'll look at the city itself. A city born from the lagoon. Okay, why, right? But what is a lagoon? We throw this word all around. Anybody know?
Islands and water are all around them and marshy stuff.
Right, good. Island all around. Well, to be a little bit more exact, it's usually a calm, what they call it a quiet bit of water, surrounded by, broken away from, separate from a large body of water. In the case of Venice, that would be the Adriatic Sea, right? Shallow water usually muddy, right? That kind of thing. That is a lagoon, and that's where Venice sits, okay? So we'll talk about how it was born, why, right? And how this city, born out of the marshland, became an empire. Third act, the Serenissimi's legacy. Serenissima, you've heard the word serenity, right? Serena, right? They call Venice the Serenissima. Why? Because it was the most serene during its history, the most stable during its history, which is so important if you want to become a powerful, organized country, or in this case, republic. We're talking about a republic. Venice was never a monarchy, right? It didn't have an emperor. It was an empire, but no emperor, okay? And the last act, I'll talk about the problems that Venice had in the past and the problems that it has today, right? We'll talk about that in the last act. And then I'm gonna have a bonus slide. A bonus, I didn't even put, bonus, yes. I'm gonna tell you what I think are the must-sees in Venice. A little advice, right? For any of you who have not gone, although most of you have been there. But here is some of the things I think are important to see. All right.
Sounds good.
Okay, Venice is born in a world of collapse. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, Venice was founded by essentially refugees, immigrants, right? Where did they come from? They came from the northern part of the mainland of Italy. They had to flee. Why? Attila the Hun, the Visigoths, the Germanic tribes came down into mainland Italy, what was then, wasn't called Italy, but the Italian mainland, and these refugees were worried for their own protection, and they fled to the lagoon, right? They fled their land-based economy behind, and they went to live in the lagoon, and we'll get into that. So, and then of course Rome fell, right? 476. So Rome and the surrounding area was chaotic. So these immigrants fled. And the last point is very important to today's presentation. Power shifts to Constantinople in the east. Constantinople, that is today's Istanbul. And after Constantinople became a city and that we know, established by Constantine. It eventually was called Byzantine. So you're going to hear that quite a bit. Byzantine, Byzantium, which is another word for Constantinople, or we're going to hear the Byzantine Empire. Well, so very quickly, chaos on the mainland. The Roman Empire fell 476 AD. So what happened, right? Places in a chaotic state, refugees go from the mainland to this lagoon. Their allegiance then was then shifted from where they came from, places like Padua, and shifted to Constantinople in the east, right? That was the Roman and the Eastern Roman Empire. Even before Rome fell, there were two empires, right? You know, Rome had two administrative units, if you will. One in Rome, the empire, one in Rome, and one in Constantinople. Western, Eastern. So then the power shifted after Rome fell, and that's why Venice attached themselves and became so influenced by the East. And that's why St. Mark's is considered, right? You're shaking your head, yes. Is considered it's considered Italo-Byzantine architecture because of that influence from Byzantium, from Constantinople. So that's a big power shift. Now, let's talk about this lagoon, right? So here is historic, 3 square miles, right? 2 central parks, right? The whole bit, right here. And they controlled all of this, right? This is the Adriatic, right? Shallow water, marshland, and very silt-bearing, very sandy, awful. It's not a place you want to build, but they did. So they go here. And why did they go here? Again, we talked about protection. This lagoon area became like a fortress. Which is why, right, of all the cities you may have visited, right, in Italy, no walls, right? You've been to Lucca, right? You've been to Siena, walled cities. Even Bologna had a wall. You name it, they're all walled cities. I have a list of about 45 cities of Italy that had walls. Not Venice. Venice had their own, right, natural wall, if you will. Its own moat, if you will. It was so important. Why? The Germanic tribes couldn't catch them. Why? Because they were a land-based conquering power, not sea-based, with naval vessels that can go into these shallow waters and cause a problem for these Veneti people, the people of the Veneto region, why we call them Venetians, right? They moved into this area, come and get me. No way you can, right? So they were able to stay away from the Germanic tribes and in this lagoon area. Good thing about this lagoon area, although no farmland, no hinterland, right? No agriculture to speak of, right? No grain, no wine, no cheese. You think of an Italian without those things, right? Huh? But what did it have? Fish, eel, mullet, good stuff, huh? Little sea bream, they suspect. They had some fish. Actually, the waters, that lagoon was teeming with fish. So that's good, to survive. And it had salt. Well, I always say it had salt. Not really. Salt water. And the perfect conditions in which to process or make salt. And what's so good about that? Right. See, as a seasoning and as a preservative to get you through the winter, right? What do you do with all that bacala, that codfish, right? You got to preserve it somehow. And that salt provided that advantage. So that was key. And the Venetians made a fortune processing, selling that salt, right? Or on the Italian mainland, to the areas in the north, and eventually up and down the Adriatic. So that was a very well-established commodity in no time for the Venetians. Okay? So Venice became essentially a city between two worlds. Sea and land, depended on the sea, right? Like I said, no natural resources. Depended on land too, because they needed to get the grain, right? And they did so by trading that salt for the grain, for the wine, and so forth, or other products that they needed to survive. West and east. Okay, now look at here. So here is Venice. Venice. This is right in the northeast corner of Italy, right on the Adriatic Sea, right? Not far from Ravenna. I put Ravenna up there because Ravenna, which many of you probably don't know, you can go there. There are some tours, and some people do travel there, but it's not as well known as Rome or Venice or Bologna, the Amalfi Coast, you name it. But this is where the Greeks, remember I said that Rome fell, and Constantinople became the city, and should have been, because Constantinople, and in the 5th century, was a very cosmopolitan, very advanced city, Greek-speaking city, and but very well advanced in architecture, art, literature, you name it. So that's why the Venetians focused then on Constantinople, which was here, right? Another name for it is Byzantium, here, right? So Constantinople tried to maintain some control over Italy, but eventually in the 8th century, 769, they actually gave up in trying to control the Germans, the Germanic tribes of Italy. They left. And that's when Venice became more independent, more autonomous, when the Greeks left. Although Venice continued to be influenced by Constantinople. Okay? See, again, I remind you that too often when we all visit Venice, we're not told about this influence, the Greek influence in Venice. Okay? And it's a pity. Now, I keep on saying they had no natural resources. It's true, right? No farmland and so on. No mines. They didn't have much of anything except the fish. And again, they made do by making salt. The other problem was, think about that, right? It was a very marshy, silted shoreline, right? The sea, right, in which they fled to. All they had is these little fishing communities all around, these little islands, right, over 100 little islands in this lagoon, right? And it was marshy land, right? So how do you build, right? How do you build? Well, again, they didn't have natural resources, but they had human resources. These Venetians were very innovative, very. Architecturally, engineering-wise, architecturally-wise, they knew that the best way for them to build in this marshy land is to build down with wood pilings as far down as 15 feet to get to a more dense clay. Dense clay. And like I said, it can go anywhere from 3 to 15 feet down. So all these buildings you see now, right, in Venice, came about this way. These pilings, right, pushed down into the sea, because the further down you go into the sea, no oxygen. If these, right, if this wood is not exposed to oxygen, it won't, it could last. This would last, as they have done for thousands of years. So very innovative way of building. So what they do is build in the ground, and then they would build, a platform, again of wood, and then, of course, a house, a church, or whatever would be built above that, right? So that's what they do. And then you have these palaces in the lagoon, as you see there today. Again, these palaces, like you see above, are all built on stilts, right? All built on stilts. So I think the Venetians are very, very, very clever. And they're very proud of themselves, too. We'll get into that. Okay, so they turned to the sea, right? They made the best of their situation in the lagoon, right? And they protected themselves from the barbarians. They made good use of their access to the Adriatic, and I'll have another slide about that. So they had to put sea lanes and protecting the sea lands above, looking for farmland themselves. Commerce before conquest. This is interesting. The Venetians are unlike other empires. Why? Because they never really got into this nation building the way we know the Romans did, right? Or controlling vast territories. No. Their key to success was, having ports under their control, trading links in various places, right? Not having, like I said, vast territories under their control. So commerce before conquest as such, right? And they were very diplomatic. They'd do business with anybody. It was all about business to the Venetians. That was it. I mean, that was, they said, and they always think of, sometimes say, well, didn't religion get in the way? Sometimes. There's an expression that they use to describe Venetians. Veneziani, Venetians, poi Christiani. Right? Venetians first, Christians next. And they were like that with everybody. They do business with, and they got on the bad side of the Pope every now and then, because of, what are you doing business with the Muslims, the infidels? The Venetians will look the other way. I'm going to make money, I got to trade, I got to do business with the Muslims. Right? And so they did. I talked about how tiny, right? Indeed, huh? 2 central parks. Very, very small. At one time, there were about 200,000 Venetians living in those 3 square miles. Now there are about 50,000. 50,000. What does that look like? A fish, right? Interesting, huh? That Venice, right? And who depended on the sea, married. They're so dependent on the sea. I don't know if you all heard this. Maybe you've been there at this time. Once a year, they have a procession, a ceremony on the water. It's Ascension Thursday, Ascension, one of the religious holiday, and they would actually, used to be the Doge, the leader, right, the Duke, if you will, used to do this. He would get what would amounted to a wedding ring, and he would throw it into the sea. Now the mayor of Venice does this every year. They have this long procession, have a yacht race, and they make a big day of this, again, by reaffirming their marriage to the sea. That's how important it is. Anyway, you can see there, again, how you have the canal and it's surrounded by the sea. So we're going to talk now about this trading machine, right, in our Act 2. Salt flats.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, you recognize that, right? So this is how they provided the kind of right climatic conditions to make salt. Salt was called what? Called the white gold. That's how important it was. And it's going to be interesting to see because of the contacts, because of the trading agreements, because of, in fact, the very trade that they did in salt, they were able to piggyback on that when it came to spices. Nutmeg, cinnamon, mace, ginger that they got from the Far East. And they traded that and they made enormous profits. In fact, they made more profits from spices than they did from salt. And that's what got them in trouble later on. Because they made so much more money, the Portuguese and the Spanish couldn't stand it anymore. And what did they do? They looked to get to the spices themselves, right? And we'll get into that. Columbus went to who knows where, and as another topic. And then, of course, the Portuguese were able to get to those spices eventually. But Venice made a fortune. And I think someone said easy to carry is true, easy to package, easy to transport, and they don't, what do you call it? They're able to stay fresh for long periods of time. Don't spoil spices. So they were able, again, to not go to the Far East to get the spices, but go to trading ports, trading places throughout the Levant, to Alexandria in Egypt, to Constantinople, to get those spices, bring them to Venice, and again, sell them wherever they could at enormous profit. Okay, let's look again, right? How its location. And they say location, location, location. Well, it's true with Venice, right? Right, here we are. Here's Venice, right? Here's that Ravenna again, remember? Okay? But once Ravenna, the Greeks left Ravenna, Venice had complete control of this Adriatic, down into the Ionian Sea, they controlled this whole area. And then they would, again, do business with this Constantinople here. So it became, Venice became the gateway between Byzantium, the east, and the west. And a great cruise, by the way, is to take a cruise, right? From Venice down the Dalmatian coast and all the way down here into the Mediterranean. And then some people go to Russia, right? St. Petersburg, into the Baltics. Wonderful way to spend your time. And I was telling this gentleman before, you could start in Venice and go back to Venice on one of these cruises, or go to Venice and end up in another port, but it's a lovely way to see that part of the world. Okay. So how did they get get these spices, make a fortune in the process? The spices came, right, from here, the Spice Islands, to the Straits of Malacca. That's the port of Hormuz of its day, right? Right, and up through the Red Sea and to Genoa. Genoa, by the way, one of the rivals of Venice during this whole period of time, right? After the fall of Rome in 476, right through to the 18th century, Genoa was a major trading power, just like Venice. And they actually went to war with one another. Anyway, two ways of getting these spices, right? One is by sea and land, right, to here. The other was over the Silk Road, which Marco Polo made famous, right? There's the Silk Road, right? That's by land. They would get these goods back into Venice from the east, and not just spices. Silks from Alexandria, right? Beautiful silk products from Egypt, and so on. All of these high-priced goods would make their way to Venice, to the Rialto. Some of you must have gone to the Rialto Bridge, and that was actually the beating heart of commerce. That was That was the Wall Street of its day, right? A major financial center, Rialto, within the historic Venice. Well, a 5-minute walk from St. Mark's. 5-minute walk. Which is the problem in Venice. Because when you go to Venice, you could have, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, on any one day you can have 80,000 tourists in Venice. And those 80,000 are going to see the Rialto and they're going to see St. Mark's. They're all there, we're all there at the same time. And there are only 50,000 people in Venice. I mentioned Marco Polo, a Venetian, right? I always got to remind people, a Venetian, a trader. His comes from a family of traders. You remember, he succeeded his father and uncle in going to China, right? He and wrote about all the wealth he saw, the spices he saw, the gold he saw. And this inspired generations of explorers, including Columbus. Right? Columbus brought 2 books on his trip to the New World. What were those 2 books? Anybody know? He brought the Bible, and he brought Il Milione. I'm sorry. This book here, Il Milione, which basically means the exaggerator, because they often say that he exaggerated everything, all the wealth that he saw, by a lot. And so, but what he did was instill in people by talking about this. And he, by the way, he didn't just go to China. He traveled all over Asia, Marco Polo. So when he wrote about it in his travels, another name for this book is The Travels of Marco Polo. The Italians call Il Milione. It's kind of a derogatory way. But in English, we know it's The Travels of Marco Polo. By writing that book, and it was wildly popular in its day. Everybody read that book. It really inspired people to do more business in Asia, particularly the Venetians. And it also encouraged people, again, to use more spices. Spices became the thing, the thing to have. Spices became, even it became kind of, how would I put it, had certain snob appeal. Because if you're any wealthy person, you want to make sure you showed, oh, I got the cinnamon here, and I have the nutmeg in large quantities, right? So it became very, very important. And not to mention the fact that it was a good seasoning, it's good for seasoning food, right? And not so much preserving food, which like we described before. It's really salt that preserves food, right? Not so much pepper and the other spices, no. So you're going to have, you're going to build a great nation, right? One of the things you're going to be a military, you have a military presence, or you're going to be a naval empire. You have to have a great navy, which they did. And they built this navy in what is called the arsenal. A big shipbuilding industry they had in Venice. Built thousands of ships each and every year and employed thousands of people in every aspect or every part of the shipbuilding exercise, right? So they had that, right? So this is the network that they depended on. So they had the ship building capabilities, and they had the weaponry associated with that because they needed. These ships had to be fortified with weapons because you never know when pirates are going to attack and so on. So they had all of that. And where did they go, right? Where did they get the grain we talked about, the cheese, the wine, and so on? They went, Venice up here, this was their main area of control, right? And these are all port cities, right? This is down the Dalmatian coast here. Yeah, Corfu, including Corfu, Negroponte, Crete, Cyprus, all very important places in which they controlled and in which they can get the kind of product that they needed, right? So that's why Venice is often called Stato da Mar, right? A sea state, if you will. Mar being sea, okay, and Stato, of course, state, right? And again, I make this point, unlike Rome, right? It built to secure shipping lanes, right? That was the important thing. Commerce was important. And controlling key checkpoints, not building factories here and there and putting, establishing a colony in which you put a governor in place. No. They didn't do any of that sort of thing. I often say it cuts the overhead down, right? Okay, these are kind of key points along the way. I talked about Ravenna before, right? All these things in my mind contributed eventually to the independence of Venice and the Venice we know today. Independence, the autonomy of Venice. First, the fall of Ravenna, Greeks leave. This global bull, which was like an edict from Constantinople, which said, okay, you Venetians, you've come to our protection, you're getting too strong, you're getting too powerful, you're always demanding this and that. Okay, we give up. You want special trading privileges, less taxes, less this, less that. Okay, you got it. Very good for Venice, right? The Fourth Crusade. You know about crusades? Yeah. So often referred to the Catholic jihad. Why? Because the idea of the crusade was what? To reconquer Jerusalem. Right? To get Jerusalem out of the hands of the Muslims, right? And so, Constantinople, well, I shouldn't say it's Constantinople, but the Vatican at the time, the Pope at the time says, okay, listen, you Venetians, you're so strong, you're so powerful, you have to help us regain control of Jerusalem. The Venetians, the crafty ones that they were, this was in 1202, 1204, right? They said, okay, we'll do it. We'll come to your aid, we'll support this venture, we'll help fund this exercise. So they get on their boats and they get as far as Constantinople. They never made it to Jerusalem. They didn't do it. But what did they do? What did they do? No, they did more than trade. They looted Constantinople. By 1202, 1204, Constantinople, yes, was a powerful influencer, right? But it didn't have much of an army or a navy. That's why they depended on Venice as much as they did over the years. So they were growing weak, Constantinople. And the Venetians took full advantage of them. And they looted the Hippodrome. They looted the churches of Constantinople. Those mosaics you saw in St. Mark's Basilica, they all came from Constantinople, the East. That's why, and well, we'll go into other aspects of that church, but much of what you see, the altar, came from Constantinople. Not Persia. No, from Constantinople.
Not purchased.
Not purchased, looted, stolen, robbed. Yeah, from one church to their church. They were taken from churches or from, like I said, the Hippodrome, those 4 horses we're about to see. So it's amazing, okay? So, Fourth Crusade. So that's again, how by getting those, as devious as they were, as reprehensible as the Venetians were, by getting those mosaics, getting that altar, getting that statue or this statue, that marble work, whatever, it added to the prestige of Venice. And they said to the world, don't look to Constantinople, look to us now. We're the powers. We're the big guy on the street now, you know? Okay, and then lastly, by the way, they eventually took control of Constantinople. And then the War of Chioggia. Remember I said they went to war with Genoa. Anyway, and by the way, you're going to hear this word again, Chioggia again. Some of you may have visited Chioggia before, and if you haven't, you should go. They call it the Little Venice. It's good for bike riding. You can go. They have canals, bridges like you see in Venice. It's a nice place to visit. It's still a fishing village, Chioggia. It's on the southern tip, outside of historic Venice, and one of the islands. You might want to visit there someday. Now, so we mentioned its location. We mentioned the fact that they had the human resources, the intelligence, the innovativeness to build as they did with those wood pilings, right? But they also had good government. That's why we say La Serenissima. That's how they refer to Venice, right? And they had good government. Not a monarchy, right? Like I said before, no emperor, but they had a doge. He was kind of the elder statesman, and not hereditary, right? So, and it was basically ruled by councils. Councils. It was a republic, right? It was a republic of businessmen, really, what it was all about. And it was good government. I mean, they got into scrabbles here and there, but nothing like the people of Genoa. Nothing like Pisa, because Pisa was also a rival and a trading power at one stage. Or Amalfi. No. The Venetians remained relatively stable because, like I consider, they had good government, right? Ruled by councils of people, right? And this is the Doge Palace, which you can visit, and I would recommend if you have a chance. Remember I said you go from the Doge Palace to the jail, right? Well, there's this ornate palace, and you know this was, some people call this was like the Senate, the executive branch, all right, and the legislature all in one, all in the Doge, you know, and it would be all here, you know, all these edicts and proclamations, ceremony, pomp, all emanated from here, which was right next door, which is still right next door, this Doge Palace, to St. Mark's, right next door. Because originally St. Mark's was just a chapel for the Doge, right? But again, a good a place to visit. The Venetian mindset. I gave you one clue, right? When I talked about, you know, Veneziani poi Cristiani, Venetians first, Christian. That was one part of their thinking, their mentality. Because business was the end-all and be-all for this small historic center, right? They were a very cohesive unit, very cohesive, these people. And I guess they felt they had to be. They were small, right? And they came from the same background, immigrant kind of mentality. So very pragmatic, very confident. And also religious tolerance. Even though, and this is the flag, right, of Venice. And it's very telling in a way, right? A lot of religious symbolism there, you know, saints and what have you, all around, the Virgin Mary, the St. Mark right here, right? And we'll talk about St. Mark. They got the remains, another looting. Right. They didn't buy the remains. They stole the remains, not from Constantinople, from Alexandria in Egypt in the 9th century. And that was the great draw. They said, we have the remains of the evangelist, St. Mark. Rome may have St. Peter, but we have St. Mark. That kind of thing. It went on in those days. That it's thought to be, you know, one-upmanship was going on there. And again, try to raise their prestige in the eyes of the world by getting those remains and putting them in a tomb under the altar, even to this day in St. Mark's. But anyway, this is another emblem or symbol of Venice. This is the winged lion of St. Mark. So it's coming, and it has two things, right? The sea, right, and the land, the castle, Castle Glatane, and St. Mark in control. St. Mark's in control, but yet religious influence. I think it's a very interesting flag. It says a lot. So they were Christians when they had to be. They talked peace when they had to, you know. But they said, we're the boss. We have St. Mark. Look how strong, look how powerful we are. Well, this is kind of, busy slide. I don't think you have to read too much. I think I've said enough about its naval power, its industrial. This next two is really important. Because all the good things come to an end, right? So along the way, they build up this great naval industrial capacity. They become very rich, very wealthy. But what do they do with that wealth? What did they do? They didn't go on cruises, A lot of that money was spent internally. They built magnificent palaces, museums. They put it into great architecture, all again very much influenced by the East, and that what made Venice carry on beyond the years or after they became, after their decline as a naval power. They had the beauty, they had the charm, right? They had the prestige, they had the architecture, they had great centers of learning. Soft power versus, the superpower status that they once had. Okay, like I said, all things come to an end, right? But their identity endures. Let's talk a little bit more about this, okay? So, in the year 1000 or so, they start building this great basilica. They didn't buy, but they stole those horses. They sold those horses. They had the gall, if you will, the audacity. What do they do? So they get the horses that were in the hippodrome, right, from Constantinople, and they put them right in front of the church. Right in front. So they put them right there. Right there. In other words, look what we stole. Right there. Right? Okay. So, and of course, the mosaics and all, also, again, coming from the East, most stolen. And that, this really does it. So, remember I said they got the remains from Alexandria. The remains were stolen by two businessmen who convinced the Muslim traders that the remains that they had in this basket, you don't want to go near them. This is meat, This is pork, You don't want to go near this. This is contaminated, So as actually the remains, this is the way the story goes. God knows what really happened. But in any case, so the remains were taken out of Alexandria, stolen away. So what do the Venetians do? The Venetians actually paint one of their portals, talking about stealing the remains. And they have these portals here. 1, 2, 3, 4. All of them here tell this story. And the first being on the southwest corner of the church, in the front, the edifice, right, is right here, which is this is when they actually got the remains. And like I said, they eventually found their way into the church, and they remain there today. And this was, how would I put it? This gave them, again, prestige, snob appeal, if you will, that they now have the remains that once were in Alexandria, they're now in our basilica. And that also attracted a lot of pilgrims. Pilgrims like to go and pray. And again, it said to the world, this church, right, this basilica said to the world that we are the new players in town now. Forget about Rome, forget about Constantinople. We are numero uno, okay? And like I said, they also poured their money into art. Some of the best, you want to see very, very good Renaissance painting, you don't have to go to Rome. You don't have to go to Florence. Venice will do very well. They say that Tintoretto, or if not Tintoretto, Titian or Titian, as good as Michelangelo, some people like to say. That's how good. And they are housed, some of these paintings, in what they call scuola, or scuole means, that's plural, or a scuola is a school. It's like a confraternity or more than one, a building in which these great paintings can be seen. So they poured their money, they help foster, they help patronize the great painters of the day. But they don't have like a Medici family in Florence. It was kind of more widespread, this contribution to the arts. And they did a wonderful job of that. And like hence today, we still have, we're still able to see these wonderful paintings. So again, so we're getting away from that naval power, right? And we're moving now as time goes on, and money is being channeled into these very artistic endeavors, helps Venice last, helps Venice endure. This is one of my favorite paintings. I'm a spice trade buff. You know, I like to study spice trade. So this, I don't know if this is from the Bible, right? This painting, and again, you could see this in Venice. This painting is the Queen of Sheba, right? You recognize it. And then the Queen of Sheba goes to Solomon for advice. What does the Queen of Sheba bring to Solomon? Yeah, we think, cinnamon. She brings, you know, probably some gold, but also cinnamon, spices. So again, it goes to show you that even during the Renaissance period, they knew about the importance of spices and so on. And they depicted the Queen of Sheba in that way. So it's a very, very telling painting. And of course, the Renaissance, the Venetian Renaissance painters were very well known for their light and shadow, very distinctively so. And art glorified the Republic, not just religion, right? A lot of what they did was to help make themselves look good, right? Glorified this great Venetian Republic. They also poured their money into music. Everybody know, I don't know everybody, most people know who study opera know that Florence was the birthplace of opera. But the first opera house open to the public was in Venice. It's now closed, Teatro San Cassiano. That was this building over here. Now it's the opera, which is very, very good. This opera house is Teatro La Fenice, the Phoenix. Why? It was burned down 3 times and it rose again. La Fenice, it's called. Wonderful opera house. Very small. Only seats about 1,000 people. But look at something. This is the inside. You can go, by the way. Look at the way it's shaped. Horseshoe shaped, right? Suppose you have a seat over here. How well can you see the stage? Not so well, right? This was rebuilt in 1996, by the way. So, I mean, it was built according to the original plans, which go back hundreds of years, right? But it's horseshoe shaped. The Italian opera houses before 1900 were built this way. Why? No, good answer, guess. The acoustics, actually, the acoustics in La Fenice are okay, but not great. You know, go to Milan is better. But no, the horseshoe shape is because all the action is not on the stage. Yes, yes, the people. They want to see who else is there. There are people watching. Typical Venetian. Okay, this is good what's going on there, but look who's gone. This horseshoe shape satisfied their interest. But you can go, and it's all gold, you see there. It's gold. It's very, very ornate, very nice looking, very attractive looking. So they excelled in this. Also, I wanted to mention this library. There was a time and still to this day, if you want to study Greek classics, manuscripts, Latin manuscripts, go to Venice. Wonderful library called the Channel. Also, right downtown. Everything is right downtown. It's such a small place. But it's right near the Doge's Palace. I think this pretty much sums up what we just discussed. Venice did not merely accumulate wealth, right? It actually converted this prosperity by paying attention to its beauty, its identity, and power. Right? That's what they conveyed to the world through the arts, through the architecture, and so on. Also, pageantry, I wanted to mention. Venetians loved pageantry. They loved the masks. They liked parade around the costumes during, the run-up to Lent, the Carnivale, and so on, right? And a lot of that pageantry came from the East. That's also an influence from the Eastern Empire, right? From Constantinople, this love for pageantry and ceremony. Okay, this is the last act, right? Venice must adapt. What happened? Remember I said the Europeans, the monarchies now, right, of Spain and Portugal said enough is enough. Venice is making too much money. We want to get to the source of those spices. We want to buy low, sell high, right? We want to get to the source. Now, think about it. Venice is at the head of the Adriatic, flows into the Mediterranean. They control the Mediterranean. Their focus is the Mediterranean. But Spain and Portugal, where are they? They're facing the Atlantic, right? So that's where they're, especially Spain. So what happens? Columbus goes west to go east, right? He was looking for, the Spice Islands, right? He was looking for India, right? He finds, the Bahamas, right? So he goes that direction. The Portuguese go south to east, right, across the Indian to get to India. They were successful, right? Starting out in 1497, eventually 1498, they get to India and they get the spices. And they're thereby cutting out Venice. Venice was still concentrated on the Mediterranean, right? So basically, you saw that slide before. If this was, I could have labeled this before and I could have labeled this after, right? So after, like I said, 1497, 1498, the Portuguese, right, would make their way, right, down the coast of Africa, all the way to here, and eventually they would go further east and south to the Straits of Malacca and to the Spice Islands, right? So they did all of that. And of course, the Venetians were still concentrating on the Mediterranean. Another thing to keep in mind, these were monarchies. As rich as Venice was, it was a republic. To use, financial terminology that we use today, they didn't have the financial, the tax base that the monarchies had, that Spain and Portugal had, right? They didn't have enough income to compete also as well as the monarchies, these bigger countries, right?
Is that because they didn't hold the money, because it was a republic, the money went back to the individual?
There's some of that, yeah, some of that. And you're right, that the kings and queens of their day would consolidate that money and put it aside to fund this voyage or that voyage, yes. So we went from an empire to a cultural capital, right? And started to vote after it dawned on, well, even before, over time, they developed other industries, right? It wasn't always, this industry, they had to localize, as it were, right? So this is that library I talked about. So they developed learning. They became a center of learning. They also shifted attention to the glass industry. Some of you may have been to Murano, right? Glass making, yeah, I see you shaking your head. We also silk. You can still see silk today in Burano, right? I mentioned Chioggia before, a fishing village. So they developed other industries to help endure, right? To help get by, because they lost that overseas network like they once had. And then finally, the French took over Venice Basically, Venice by the 1797 was growing weak. They didn't have the same kind of firepower, as it will, so the French basically walked in. The French at the time and the Austrians were always competing with one another, and they thought to have Venice in their camp would be good, because of its location. So the Republic eventually dissolved after 1,100 years of independence and having a republic. They could not survive anymore as an independent republic. 1,100 years. One of the longest republics, one of the longest empires of all time, Venice, right? And they passed under foreign rule, and it was kind of a sorry history after that. The French came, then the Austrians, the French again, and so on, until 1866, right? Right? 1861 is when Italy unified, right? Italy, as we know it, became into being, but the Venetians did not, that republic did not join the Italian unification until 1866. Okay, so basically, eventually, Venice lost its sovereignty and became very vulnerable, like I said, to the modern states like eventually Austria, France, and then eventually, because it didn't have the power, the influence, or the money to fund voyages to the east or to the west, right? So we talked about this. Some of you have visited these places. This lagoon became quite different over time, right? Noted for its glassmaking, noted for those painted buildings you see in Burano, noted for Chioggia. Remember I said it's like a little Venice. You might want to visit those places. So this Venice became something quite different over time. But now we have modern Venice. Is that good or bad? That sigh. Lord Byron would like that sigh, right? Okay, crowds. Well, like I said, if you go into, this is the Rialto, huh? So either you go to here or there. I mean, so in one day you see everything, 80,000 people, as many as that, can be going to those two places. That's why you have so crowded, right?
Is there a better time of year to go?
Oh, winter, for sure. This is mostly summertime, for sure. July, August, September, terrible. Now, used to be that cruise ships used to go there. I mean, when I first visited on a cruise ship, we went right in there. No more. So they're trying to do something about all the crowds, and they're trying to do something about what we call hit and run tourists. They get into town, they don't spend a nickel, and they're out, right? They go into town, they walk around, crowd up the place, and they go, you too? Yeah. I know. We don't want to talk about you. Now they're going to charge you for doing that. Yeah. So they go into, they call them hit and run or day trippers, right? They hit and run or they're day trippers. And so they're trying to do something about it, and they're also trying to help the environment by not allowing these cruise ships to go. And I'll show you where the cruise ships are docking now, okay? Flooding, also a big problem. Not from rain. It's kind of unusual climatic conditions of the Adriatic that overflow those islands and come into the lagoon, causing serious flooding. And people did have to walk around like this. And I have to admit though, the world came in New York and came through, and a lot of other places came through to help the Venetians come up with the money to help preserve some of these great buildings, the artworks, and so on, and the church and the basilica, because tremendous damage was done. The last one, I believe, is in 1996. And they built these floodgates. Have we working? They've been around now for 7-8 years, I think now. And they're holding back the sea, but who knows how long this could last. But it's very, very costly. And it's very controversial. But they are in place, and they come up out of the water when they have, when these weather trackers see that there may be some, what they call high sea, the seas, when they know the seas are about to rise, they open up these gates. But it costs a lot of money just to monitor the situation, day after day, hour after hour, that kind of thing. And then the cost of actually and the energy associated with pulling up those gates in 4 different locations in the canal. Okay, so it used to be, right, that the ships would come in here, make a real nuisance of themselves, polluting the waters, and one of the problems with these ships was that the soil is so soft, right, that it would stir up the soil, and it just caused for a very unhealthy situation and caused more damage to the surrounding buildings and infrastructure. So that's why, another reason why these cruise ships are no longer allowed. So that's where they go. Most of them are here. Porto Marghera, this cruise terminal. Some now go to his Fusina as well. So they're no longer here. That's historic Venice, right? This is the airport and so on. Now, there is a causeway, right? But this causeway, by the way, was only built in the 19th century, before the unification of Italy, maybe just after. And this causeway, before that, the only way to get in there was by ferry. Either, not the gondola, it would be the vaporetti. That does these, right, these ferries, right, these motorized ferries, right, that go all around the lagoon. So that's like even the last time we were there, we would get back from our hotel and they would take us by ferry to the cruise terminal or to Marco Polo Airport. All right? That's how you do it nowadays. This is Venice today, huh? Now, one of the recommendations I'm going to make to you in a minute or so is this is the Campanile. This is the clock tower. I recommend that you do that. It's 300 and some odd feet high. But you notice there are no tall buildings. So you get up on the top there, and you can take an elevator or walk, but 300 feet high. But you have a wonderful panoramic view of Venice. And now that you know how small it is, and you get an idea of what life is like in that lagoon, it's just such a remarkable story, right? And you can see it all from here. And this is the dome. See this Middle Eastern type domes of the basilica. You see that? Yeah. This is the Doge's palace, right? And that's the basilica is here. This is the square, right? I like to say, I also put this in a warning to the modern world. Overcrowding, pollution, flooding, what to do about it. Barcelona, cities like that are looking at Venice very closely. Really, other cities. So Venice is now teaching the world quite a bit about what to do about these modern day problems. And it's now, I truly believe, it's a culture. Why does George Clooney want to live there? Why does Jeff Bezos want to get married there? Why is this film festival there? Why is that? Venice has that staying power. No longer a naval power, not even talked about, right? But it has that power. Tourism, I don't have to belabor this, 1 second. Tourism is definitely, and hospitality, the #1 draw, right? That's how they make their money, right? So that's why, damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? Do I want the tourist in, or do I not want them in? It's a tough one. How can we not talk about food, right? Right? This is the cicchetti, right? These small tapa-like things. I often tell people, when I go to Italy, I overdose on pasta. What's a meal without pasta? Tell me. Breakfast. Breakfast. So but the only place I don't overdose on pasta is Venice. Certainly don't eat pizza. I don't want to get into that again. But these are the kind of dishes you can have. You go to these small little wine bars, get the local wine, nice little glass of wine, and have these. Now, even if you don't like codfish, so have it anyway. I mean, it's really good. These little bite-sized dishes called cicchetti, right? And it is really shaped by anchovies are big, sardines. You know, given the past of Venice and its connection with the sea, no wonder these are popular. This is where a Venetian would tell you to go. Go to a Baccaro, huh? Or, you know, one of the Baccari, right? And have one of these dishes. And Joyce and I, my wife and I, did this not too long ago. It was wonderful. Quiet, all by ourselves, in a little wine bar, have these dishes, no pasta. So, I'm almost done now, but I ask you, what makes Venice one of a kind? Think about that. In your own mind, why do you think Venice, or do you think Venice is one of a kind? Anybody? Anybody? Sure it is. What sticks out in your mind? Why would you say it's one of a kind? And
You just told us.
everything. Well, I like you.
It's unique for this, it's unique for this, it's unique for that.
Exactly. And that's why Mundus Alta, Petrarch said that. That's how he described it, right? In the 15th century. Famous poet, historian from central Italy called Venice Mundus Alta, one of a kind. Okay. So this is what I find. This is what I would do. Right? My 5 musts. Go to St. Mark's. You got to go. But don't go with the crowds. Maybe go the right time of the year, right? And go early. Right? Beat the crowds. Go early in the morning. If you can, get a good tour guide, but make sure they tell you all about the Eastern, influence of that cathedral, of that and basilica, and the influence of Constantinople on Venetian history. Go up to that Campanile, that clock tower. It's a must. Ride the canal. What did I say earlier? There were 2 reasons why, right? Remember I said there were 2 reasons why I give these lectures? 2 reasons why I studied Venice?
You were going to tell us the second one.
Right.
Yes.
The first one I told you is because I was disturbed over all these people that never said enough. The tour guides said enough, right? Second reason is this. So, we go on a cruise, right? My wife and I. We go on a cruise, and at the last day, the cruise says, we have a special surprise for you. Okay, what is it? So, they took us to the station where all the gondolas are, right? Right? And we were put in a gondola with an accordion player. You know, they love accordions, the Italians, right? Accordion player who sang, and a singer in our gondola. So we go out onto the canal, right? Go onto the canal, and a guy looks at me. He says, you got the map of Italy written all over your face. I said, yeah. He probably says that to everybody, right? So anyway, I said, yeah, my grandparents, yeah, okay. And he starts singing these old Neapolitan songs, because my family is from the Naples area. Wonderful love songs, right? On the top of their lungs, they're singing, they're playing the accordions. And I'm trying, but I don't know, the old Italian, I didn't know anything. And then, all of a sudden, he starts singing, they both start singing, Volare. Well, when I tell you the whole lagoon, the entire lagoon, including us, started singing Volare. It was wonderful. It was moving. And here we are sitting, and the best way to see Naples is from the water. And you're looking out, if you're not at the Campanile, right? The water, right? And what did I say, Naples? Venice. Naples not bad either. And that's what happened, and that was moving. I said, I got to know more about this place. So that was the second reason. Okay. So ride the canal, and go at sunset. Ride the canal like we did. We went during the day, but I would go at nighttime. That's the best way to see. All the lights are shining. That's very nice, very romantic, if that's your thing. Okay. Get lost on purpose. I say that with tongue-in-cheek, but meaning that get away from the Rialto, get away from the square, walk around a bit, drop in at a wine bar. You never know what you're going to see how the ordinary people live. Cicchetti, I'd already sort of do that. Have some of those little bite-sized tapa-like. Have a spritz with that, maybe. Aperol spritz, wildly popular now. Have an evening at the opera. La Fenice is pretty special. Pretty special if you like opera. So those are the things I say. And by the way, need I say it again? Save the pizza for Naples, right? Thank you all. Grazie mille. I know I ran over. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, you had mentioned Chioggia as the, it's the small Venice. I've heard Treviso.
Yes.
Yeah, is that another?
Another one, not as popular.
Not as popular, right?
Not as many things to do, but restaurants there. You can go there. It's enough. To get away from the the Rialto. I recommend that kind of travel. Take a Vaporetti, and you'll be fine. Yes.
I was going to ask you about the Lido, which is that long strip.
Yeah, yes. Beaches, noted for its beaches.
Is that what that is?
Yeah. Very nice place to visit too. Again, you could take one of the Vaporetto, the ferries there. And it's very nice. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Did the Venetians regulate the spice road, or was it only individuals that traveled it?
No.
And then did the Muslims shut it down, and that's why the Portuguese decided to sail around Africa?
Well, you got a lot in that question. Okay, so the question was, to what extent was there was regulation, did the regulate trade along the Silk Road by the Venetians or anyone else, essentially, right? Well, the Venetians did not. Venetians would wait until the goods, made their way from the Silk Road to the places like Baghdad, Damascus, or down into Constantinople and places like that, and then would buy the spices they needed. Along the way, the Muslim traders would tax some of this. As soon as it came into their territory, they would put a tax on that, and then they would move out, they go to another territory, and another tax. So by the time these spices reached Venice, they became very expensive. And then, of course, the Venetians would also make a profit from that. But actually, these spices are very cheap, right? Cheap to harvest and grow. But the problem was, all along the way, because it wasn't under the control of one nation, and they were under they had to go through various places in which these goods were taxed. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
You can go to St. Mark's in the morning. If you go to Mass, there's a separate entrance. Like
Go ahead.
when I went to Mass right before COVID, there's a separate entrance you can get into St. Mark's Basilica, and it's like on a side entrance, and you could go to Mass there.
I did.
And then,
Yeah.
so you didn't have, get in, but you don't have a tour, but it's a way of getting in without avoiding all.
Oh, yes, you can do, and we did that on a Sunday morning. Yes, you can do without a tour. Anything else before we? No? Oh, good. Okay. Thank you all.